Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Northeast Climate Adaptation Science Center webinar for today. We are very lucky to have Dr. Nikki Cavalieri on to give a talk, and also Dr. Tony Lynn Morelli to talk about our climate action tool. Um, we are going to have Tony Lynn talk for a little bit first, followed by Nikki, and after they'll talk for probably around 40 minutes or so, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. But you are welcome to put in questions into the Q&A box at any point during the webinar, and we will get to those at the end after Nikki and Tony Lynn have given their talk. Uh, all right, I will turn it over to Tony Lynn and Nikki to take it away.
Super. Thanks, Emily. Hey, everybody. Happy to be here. So, as Emily said, I'm going to be starting off, and we're here. Sybil Nicole Cavalieri is going to be doing most of the talking today, but I wanted to introduce the process by which we kind of came apart about this tool and the history. So, yeah, so here we go. I'm Tony Lynn Morelli. I'm a research ecologist with the NE CASC on the U.S. Geological Survey side. And I am here with Nikki, who works with us as essentially like a um, climate adaptation scientist that works with ORISE and the NE CASC. And so we are, sorry, I'm just switching to this. And so we're here to talk to you about adaptation planning with the climate action tool. Someone's hearing an echo. Let me know if that's me. First things first, we wanted to thank everybody that was involved in this project. This couldn't have happened along the way without dozens of collaborators, but in particular, we wanted to thank folks from CAFE, the Center for Agriculture, Food, and the Environment Extension at UMass. And that includes Lissa Kanya, Scott Jackson, Yvonne Gong, and then as well, Tom Hogendijk and Jessica Satella, as well as Heather Seiert, who's a graduate student and NE CASC fellow at UMass. You're here, so you probably know a little bit about the CASCs, but the Climate Adaptation Science Centers are spread across the country. There are 9 of them. The Northeast CASC has been around since 2012, and we're here trying to improve the way that climate science informs resource management. So you can see our purple footprint there on the right, and it's a partnership between USGS and a consortium that is hosted by University of Massachusetts at Amherst. First, I just wanted to remind you that climate change is affecting us in the Northeast. So you can see this work from Umbresh Karmalkar, who I'll mention again soon, and colleagues, including Radley Horton, and Ray Bradley, who were both original PIs of the NE CASC, that we see that the rate of warming is pretty exceptional in certain regions, including the Northeast, but it really varies. And so you can see that our Northeast is warming more than some parts of the continental US. And we also see not just kind of average increases in temperature, but also increases in extremes. So you can see that here, that if you focus in on the kind of rare occurrences with that first arrow, you can see that those will become much and much more common in the future. So the sort of exceptional warm winters or hot summers will become the norm, or even we will long for those days in the future. And Nikki, if you move on to the late century, you'll see that also effect of looking, zooming in on the Northeast, and you can see how many days we're expecting over 95 degrees at sort of a middle scenario. So this is not an extreme greenhouse gas emission scenario. You can see that we are going to be expecting and experiencing really hot days in parts of the Northeast that never has gotten them, and then a lot of really hot days in parts that only used to have a few. Next slide. In terms of precipitation, we see that there's a lot of variation, but the total is generally an increase. And so you can see that it's hard to plan around this, but generally we see like kind of an increase in the average, but a lot of exceptions. And you can see if you've been living in the Northeast in the last decade, you've experienced that. We get these like big snow events and then nothing, or we get bigger rain events and then nothing. And so you can see that variation. Next slide. If we zoom in, for example, on Massachusetts, although you can see all of the Northeast here, you can see how this is broken out. And this is where I want to make the point that all of these slides that I'm showing you here with the NE CASC and USGS stamps on them are available now based on this climate report I'm going to talk about in just a minute. So these state reports you can get information about your particular state, and it's broken out in a way that we thought would be most useful because that's what we were told by our partners. So this is work done by Ambrish Karmalkar that looks at breaking up both the current and the future climate for each state. And you can see that there is kind of the baseline information, 1991 to 2020, and then a future projection. So you can see that in a table format on the top right. You can see that in a figure on the bottom, on the left side. And there's just a reminder of looking at these were broken up into these eco regions, because that was what we were told would be the most useful by our state partners. So all of this is kind of designed to be produced in the way and co-produced in a way that'd be most useful. But you can see that by the end of the century, Massachusetts, for example, might experience up to 7 degrees of warming relative to the recent decades in a medium emission scenario. So that's really remarkable. 7 degrees is real numbers. Next slide. And we'll see more and more extreme heat. So you can see that, again, this idea, as you see these hot over 95-degree days, you can see those creeping in. Next slide. And again, precipitation projected to increase for the Northeast, but lots of variability from year to year. Next slide. And we get more changes in extreme precipitation. So we have an overall average increase, but we have more and more days where we have lots of precipitation, like over 1 inch of rain happening more than it used to. You can see that increase in days where it used to not be. It used to be very rare or not happen at all. Next slide. And then again, here is some look at the sea level rise change, for example, in Boston. So all of those, what I just showed, is available for all of our states. And you'll see, well, we can drop some links in the chat as we're presenting here where you can get this information. Next slide. So this information we're presenting on today is based on originally climate synthesis we did in partnership with the northeastern states that were working on their state wildlife action plan revisions for 2015, 2016. And this was a partnership that started about back in 2013 with USGS, UMass, and other partners, looking at how could we be most helpful for our state partners in terms of the state wildlife action plan revisions. And so we produced this big document. We can drop a link in the chat. There's lots of great information in there, and some of it is still very relevant, and it works as the base for the next report we did, which was just now. And so it officially came out in 2024, but it's for the next SWAP revision, which is they're all coming out right around now. You can see that this work was led by Michelle Staudinger, who used to work with us at the NE CASC and is now up in Maine. You can see Ambrish Karmalkar's name on there, other colleagues that have worked on this. And so it was a great group of people working really hard. This report is hundreds of pages long. It's got lots of great information. Next slide. So it's built into 5 chapters, and this is what they look like generally. So the first one is a little bit of what I just went through, sort of like climate change, right? How are the key drivers changing? Where are the greatest change occurring? The second one is species focused. So a literature review of the state species of greatest conservation need in the region, going through that, looking at any information in the literature about climate change in those species. The third chapter is focused on all the climate change vulnerability assessments that are available for those RSGCN. The fourth chapter looks at actions that could be taken and ways that people are using concepts in ecology and conservation biology to take action and strategies. And then finally, a lot of case studies that could help kind of show, exemplify the work that can be done. So this is a big compendium. And I think I have one more slide before I hand it off. You can see just like quickly, here's some stats. So this is the 13 states in the AFWA footprint. For the literature review, we synthesized over 800 articles for over 400 species. We added a new climate change vulnerability assessment. So you can just see there's really big numbers here of all the things we did. And what that means is that it was like a 600-page document. We'll drop the link, but it is great. And also that PDF is not always the best way to get information. So what we wanted to do was to add to this website that actually originally came out 10 years ago, and it's been well loved, but we hadn't updated it since. And so that's what I'm going to hand over to Dr. Cavalieri to talk about, that this new and improved climate action tool website that we just launched last month, that has all this information in it, and to show you how you can navigate the site and hopefully get the most out of it. Over to you, Nikki. I'm not sure if you're frozen, Nikki.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, there's an irony that you have this person holding their hands
Yes.
over there. There, you're all set.
Okay, so you just found out that your colleague who works on climate issues is no longer with your organization, and it's up to you to fill the role. Now what? You know things about climate, but you don't know everything, and you weren't expecting to need to know everything super fast. Don't worry, the Climate Action Tool has got you covered. So hop on over to the Climate Action Tool. Okay, so how is climate changing? Well, this looks like a good place to start. So let's start here and see what it has to offer. All right, so we've got overall trends in climate change. We have link outs to stressors, and this is an excellent overview of how climate is changing in the Northeast. And if we scroll down and look at things, you can learn about how to handle and account for uncertainty and the effects around projected climate change. You can learn about the different emission scenarios and what you might expect in the worst case and the best case scenarios. And you can learn about climate models, what they are, how they work, and how to interpret the outputs from them. Oh, good. You have more places to learn. And we have resources to the synthesis and to external resources that you can learn more about climate models and climate change in the Northeast. And we have references. So there's always more to learn and more to explore. Yeah, so that's very useful. So you're very happy. And so now you're up to speed on climate change and you're feeling more confident about your climate knowledge in general. But now your boss walks in and says, I need you to write a management plan for drought and the impacts on fish by the end of the month. So now you're back to being stressed. But the climate action tool is there to help you. All right, so back to the climate action tool. Well, fish are species, so let's start there. Okay, so which of these are fish? So there's 145 species that you can look through, and that is a lot. And you might not know the names of everything. So we have these handy dandy filters. So you can filter by taxonomic group, you can filter by states and provinces, and you can filter by habitat. So which of these are fish? So we go to the drop-down menu and we pull down taxonomic group. And because we have no information where we need to begin, we start with all of the fish. All right, but which of these are in my state? So we'll go to the state and province filter and we'll look at West Virginia, which is our state, and we'll look and see what's there. All right, brook trout. So we've heard about brook trout. So let's see what there is underneath the link. All right, we have a species profile. Very cool. We've got what the species looks like, the scientific name. We have the stressors that impact that species. We have a profile for the species that includes a little bit about the species from a climate standpoint. We have the climate impacts to that species, and we have the references for the materials. If you scroll down a little bit more, you'll see climate vulnerability assessments. Well, what are climate vulnerability assessments? So let's start by clicking the link. All right. All right, so these are rankings, confidence, location, and time period. All right. These are things about that. But what do I do with these? What do these mean? Well, look at this little link down here. Well, that might be helpful. So what is a climate change vulnerability assessment? So let's hop on over there. Oh, it's got a little summary. It tells us what a climate change vulnerability assessment is. It explains what the rankings, the confidence, and emission scenario means. It tells us how they were developed. It tells us how they're presented in the action tool. And it talks about the uncertainty of these assessments and what we need to know about them. So that is very good. All right, also, there's always more to learn because there's additional things to help us learn about CCVAs and also all the references that we need to make sure that we are confident and know what to do with them. All right, so let's pop back to the species profile and let's scroll down a bit, see what else there is. All right, cool. This is exactly what I need. I need the climate vulnerability assessment for brown trout. So we've got that and we can link out to the original publication from the DNR. All right, we scroll down a little bit more. What are these things? Well, there's related habitats. So yes, they live in rivers and streams and we can learn more there. We know that they're fish, but also what's over here? We've got related adaptations and related adaptation strategies and actions. Oh, well, these could help with my management plan. Well, I think trout like cold water, so let's start here. Oh, so we've got how to ensure cool water temperatures to protect and restore riparian areas. Well, it's very nicely laid out. We've got the adaptation type and the strategy and what action to take and resources and more about species and habitats where this is important. Well, that's super handy. We can check out this and we can look at the resources that we need for the management plan. Excellent. I think there was something on the home page about planning, like an entire section. So let's go look back at that. All right, here's the planning section. Excellent. Ah, good. So now we know what adaptation planning is. Oh, and there's all these really cool decision support tools that might help us. Well, tools are nice. Let's check out this one. This one looks useful. So climate change scenario planning. It's got a whale, and it's got a graph to show us how to understand the framework. And this is just one way to think about it. So we can explore here and we can explore the other tools. So there's still a lot to learn, but you do have the resources to get started and some helpful tools and some climate change confidence. And you can always come back to the climate tool if you need more help. So yay! All right. But say you're a forester and you've been stressed out because you can see your forest is changing with climate change, but you don't know what your options are for helping it adapt to climate change. So you've heard about this climate action tool, and it's supposed to have information about this kind of stuff. So let's check it out. So we'll start at the beginning. Let's look at the forest tab under habitat. Let's see what there is. So we've got the stressors that affect forest in the Northeast. We've got the forest profile. And let's take a look at temperature change, because I've heard that temperature is going to impact forest quite a bit in the Northeast. Oh, key takeaways. So we can start here and we can look at the key takeaways and work our way down. We can look at the resources in the summary for the Northeast. We've got data and maps from trusted sources. We can look at it by state or we can look at it by region. Very exciting. So there's lots to learn here. And then also we can go and look at more resources externally. And actions. It's exactly what I need. I need actions for my forest because I want to protect my forest and help it adapt to climate change. So there are lots of action for forests. So let's check out promoting drought and heat tolerant species. That is one interesting idea. So let's check it out. Ah, it's quick and easy to read. Again, you can see the adaptation type, the strategy, and the actions. And you can see resources and target species and habitats and stressors. So I know about some of these resources, but I'm less familiar with these two. So let's check them out. Oh, cool. So it's got a quick overview and some useful case studies, and it's a framework in which to develop adaptation plans. And then resistance, resilience, and transformation, it's another way to look at it. And there's also more case studies. So that's very excellent. All right, so now I know what the stressors are affecting my forest. I know some frameworks to start thinking about climate adaptation planning, and I have examples of actions from case studies that I can help use to help inform my decisions. Yay! A weird bug shows up. Is this because of climate change? I don't know. I feel stressed. I'm gonna go to the climate action tool to learn more. All right, so we pop on over to the climate action tool. I feel stressed, so I'm gonna look under stressors. All right, well, we've got some things. We've got these filters, but I don't know what species it is. I don't know what habitat it's supposed to live in. So I'm going to start generally, and I'm just going to start with pest and disease. All right, pop on over there. So it's got great basic information. And we scroll down, we look at things, and we have other resources to check out. So I think we will look at the adaptation strategy for preventing introduced invasive species and for monitoring invasive species. That sounds like something we need to do. I've never seen a pink and yellow moth man. All right, so, all right, it's got actions I can take. Great, that's what I need to do. I've got places where I can report invasive species, and I'm definitely going to do that. So check out these actions. We'll check out these mechanisms to report, and we'll try to figure out how to ID the species. All right, well, I feel like I should talk to everyone about this. I wonder if there's examples of people who have dealt with something like this before. So we'll pop on over to the climate action tool. I believe something on the front page talked about examples. So we'll check out that slide. Oh, cool. So we've got examples, we've got case studies, and we've got climate amplifier vignettes. So I can take these studies and I can adapt them to my needs. Excellent. Oh, cool. There's one about moths. All right. So got quick and easy to read information. So we have the impact, the adaptation, the background, and the climates. And we go through and we look through things and we can see what others did and what they learned. Particularly here, we know that drought makes pest outbreaks work. Well, I didn't know that. And I feel like I need to tell people about this. So pop back over to the climate action tool. I think I saw something about community engagement on the homepage. So I need to talk to the public about this, but I don't know where to start. So pop on over to the community engagement link. And so we can see that we have resources, we have basic principles of what to do, and we have references to help us get more strategies and guidance to how to talk to the public about things such as invasive species and climate change. All right, so now we have ID'd the bug, we have reported it, and we are working with the community to stop the spread. So yay, we've got things in motion. So those are just 3 ways that you can use the climate action tool. There are a million different paths to take and lots of different ways to get to information. So we launched the new expansion in February of 2026. So there's different ways to use it, but is anyone using it yet? So let's compare them. Let's compare the old cat to the new cat. So in the old cat website, we had loads and loads of users. It was a beloved website. It was highly used. Even though it was 10 years old, people were still going to it every day and accessing the information. So it was incredibly useful, and that's why we've taken the time to update it and expand it. So as you might expect, most of our users were from the United States and Canada, and then a smattering around the rest of the world. And state by state in the US, it was highly based to the Northeast, and also, interesting, Ontario, which isn't in the US. So the top pages on the old cat were adaptation strategies and actions for coastal systems, climate change vulnerability analysis, the overview and for species, and for stressors as invasive as stressors. So we took this information from what people use the most, and we used that to help guide our expansion. So we've been up 59 days and we've had 6,704 unique users. So that's pretty amazing. So even though we're just at the beginning, we already know that the tool is very accessed and useful. And again, as you'd expect, most of the traffic is from the US, and Canada's also got traffic there. And then when you look at it state by state in the US, it's very much the Northeast footprint as heavily influencing the use, as it should be. Some of the top pages are similar to the original cat page, stuff about shoreline, about coastal buffers, and invasive plants and animals, and climate change vulnerability assessments. So when we updated to the new page, we included a state and province filter so that it also includes Canada, because we were getting quite a lot of traffic from Ontario, which is borders our region. And we focused heavily on doing more coastal stuff because that's what people in this region were looking for. So yeah, so we listened to our users and we improved it based on what we know. All right, so let's go through and recap. So the climate action tool can help you learn, access information, and explore. You can learn how climate is changing, which species and ecosystems are vulnerable, and how practitioners and managers are responding. We can access information about climate change impacts, climate change stressors, climate change vulnerability assessments, and species. And we have these handy dandy filters to help us go through and find the things that we need fast. You can explore adaptation strategies, actions, decision support tools, case studies, climate amplifier vignettes, and community and engagement resources. If you want to know who put this together and why they put it together, check out the About Us. If you need to know how to get around, start with the Getting Started or the User Guide. And if you ever run into any trouble, don't feel free to reach out. So contact us through the contact form if you ever have any problems, questions, or feedback. And I would like to thank the Climate Action Tool 2025 expansion team. This was a labor of love, and this was a lot of a lift to take a massive report and turn it into an easy, accessible place that users can get to it. Particularly want to say Yvonne Gahn and Tom for all of their help with the technical side of it because it was a lift to get the framework in place for us. And particularly want to thank Heather Syart and Grace for all of their help putting all of the content on there as we work through it. And always for our guidance from Tony Lynn, Melissa, and Scott on all of the things that are needed in the Northeast. So this was a labor of love between the NE CASC and Cafe. And yeah, so I can take any questions from everyone if they have them.
Great. Thanks so much, Nikki and Tony Lynn, for that presentation. If you all have any questions, please feel free to put them into the Q&A box. We do have a couple of questions already in from folks, so we'll start working on those now. All right. Can either of you speak a little bit more as to why you all chose to use RCP 4.5 and less so RCP 8.5 for the modeling?
Yeah, I can take that. We actually have a resource that I can share that was developed by Adam Tarando and others from the USGS CASC to that reflected on how do you choose particular scenarios, and best practice is choosing a few scenarios. But for the state reports, Ambrish Karmarkar went to the kind of middle of the road scenario. We've moved back and forth about whether the 8.5 scenario is in a likely perspective. There's no probability adjusts that are connected to these scenarios, but the 4.5 gives you an idea of something that's kind of reasonable to expect, but it doesn't mean that it's the path we're necessarily going to end up on. So I can paste into the chat a document that will talk more about that.
Great. Thanks, Tony Lynn. All right, another question here. Can you all talk a little bit more about how evidence of effectiveness for different strategies is integrated into the platform?
So do they mean like in the case studies?
Sure, we can start there.
So the case studies come from the synthesis report, and they are collected from practitioners in the field, and they talk about the lessons they learned. So it's something that has been acted as management. And then at the end, they've reflected and looked back and incorporated that knowledge into the document.
All right, thank you. Okay, we have another question here. So, this is
Oh,
about,
Jem, sorry,
oh,
Emily, I
go
can
ahead.
answer that as well.
Sure.
I'm gonna multitask here, but and then I did. Yes, sweet. Thanks, Emily, for starting to drop some of those links in. I think I sent you the link to the original report. I'm not sure that I can link out. So yeah, hi Deb. That's a great question. So this is something we're thinking about, like ecological efficacy a lot right now. In fact, we have a paper that there's like 20 of us from the casks that are working on it that are thinking about how to judge this, because we're moving into essentially our third decade of doing this ecological adaptation. Some of you might say, well, I was doing it in the 90s, but we're well along, and we've tried some things and we've suggested some things, and we haven't done a lot of assessing what we've done. And so I think that it's a really important part of our field in general to have a better view of the efficacy of adaptation actions. So I'm answering this like Nikki answered particularly for the website, but I guess I'm just saying generally it's something we as a field and as specialists need to be thinking about. And in a lot of ways, we're not there yet. It requires doing, setting up experimental frameworks and doing like pre-surveys and do the work up front, having multiple sites, a lot of work that is sometimes gets put to the side when we have limited resources. And this is where co-production and translational science really can come into play, because we have, for example, in the invasive species space where I do a lot of work, we have managers that are doing actions on the ground that could be considered adaptive, much of the spring and summer and fall. And if we could connect that to an experimental approach where we're just kind of doing follow-up monitoring or pre-surveys, then we might be able to say better about the effectiveness of some of those things. So I think it's a really good question. It's not well represented in the website because it's not well represented or understood yet in our field, but it's where we really need to be going.
Great. Thanks, Tony Lynn. All right, we have another question here. So in this question, they're asking, I guess New York State they have their own climate impacts assessment, likely other states do as well. So is there any way that those assessments were aligned with y'all's report? So aligning those state climate assessments with this larger synthesis report.
Do you want to take that one, Nikki, or do you want me to?
You can take it. You're more familiar with how the CCVAs were built as you're on the synthesis report.
Sure. So I would say that if you're thinking about, hi, Lauren, and if you're thinking about climate impacts assessments, they are likely based on this on similar information. We pulled all of the climate change vulnerability assessments that were at all relevant to any of the species and ecosystems that were in the Northeast swaps. So there's likely the similar foundational information. I don't think that we ended up citing particular states' climate impacts reports, but they would be based on a lot of the same primary information. And any vulnerability assessments that was done in New York would have been pulled into this compendium of vulnerability assessments so that they can be searched through and put together next to what's happening in Pennsylvania and Vermont, and probably also like Michigan and Ontario, because we pulled in vulnerability assessments that aren't just state specific. Sometimes they're state specific, but also regional.
And I can show something that might help with this question. Hang on just a second. So, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So these are the references to the state climate vulnerability assessments here. So if you link out, this goes to the West Virginia one. And the other states are also listed, sorry, like that. So here's one for Maine, here's one for the Sea Run in Maine, here's one for the Vermont, and they all link out to the state ones. This section here in the how vulnerabilities assessments are used in the climate action tool talks about how they're unified because they're all in different kind of scales and things. So when they did the census report, they worked very carefully to figure out how to unify them across it. And this is in details here on the website. And then there, if you want to get into the deep dive, check out the census report. It's cited all over the website. And the references for even more references for the synthesis are there. So you can find out more about it through that if you want to go into a deep dive.
Great. Thank you, Tony, Lynn, and Nikki. All right, we've got another question here about fire adapted systems and the species in those systems. So there are many SGCN and RSGCN species throughout the region in these fire adapted systems. So like coastal pine barrens. Um, Most swaps call out these fire adapted assemblages of rare species. So can you all talk a little bit more about how the tool can be used to build climate resilience in those kinds of systems for these types of species?
So it's a living tool. And there's not a large fire component currently on there. There's some things about using prescribed burns to help manage things, but as far as being able to look at fire as a stressor and search by that so that you can find the species that are sensitive to fire, or conversely find the species that need fire, we don't have that factored into the tool right now. But it's a living tool. So if that's something that people want, and they have data and experts that help us guide to include that, we are more than happy to add things.
Yeah, that's great. And we are in the process of bringing on an intern so that we can get someone to support the team that's been working on this because they've been working really hard and we haven't quite had all the capacity that we need. And so it's great to hear ideas of other things you'd like to see on there. Um, Remember that there's a way to contact us to note any issues you see or anything you want added. But yeah, thanks, Neil. That's a great one.
All right. We've got another question here. So, is there any information or has any information been provided on the scale of projects needed to address or match the scale of changes expected? So, for example, projects that mitigate impacts in short versus long term.
So in the case studies, they talk about the scale in which they are, but there's no way to be like, I need to manage 1,000 hectares. This is the thing for that. There's no way to incorporate that because everything's going to be different. So it's something that we want, but is beyond the capability of the resources we have right now to be like, we can search by scale, we can find projects for large scale and small scale and for near and far. We don't have, as we talked about, we don't have the evaluation of the projects to know if they do work near or far for the whole the whole field. So it is a place to grow, but we don't have that capacity or that information at this time.
Yeah, thanks, Becca. Hi, Becca. As you would probably remember, of especially that the previous, I didn't mention this earlier, but the previous version of the climate action tool was like called the MassCat. It was focused more on Massachusetts, although we ended up with information from around the region. And this round, we really tried to expand out to the whole region. But when we had it as just Massachusetts, we had cities and towns in there. And so you could kind of think of scale from that way, that we were looking at sort of like you could go to Brockton or North Adams and like look at that place in particular. That functionality is out in exchange for being able to look across the whole region. So that was a way in which scale sort of shifted. And a bit of, on top of what Nikki said, a bit of an answer to your question. I think again, and again, probably as you know, Becca, we don't quite have the answer to some of this. A lot of the best work is happening at very localized scales where people can focus and do experimental work. And then we have a sense that we need to then extrapolate and increase the scope. But that connection, I think, to more landscape level where it's less experimental and it's more like act and then hope. I think we haven't quite like bridged across those scales yet. And I think that's a really important thing to be thinking about.
All right. Thank you all for your questions. And thank you, Tony Lynn and Nikki, for your presentation and all of your answers to these questions. I think we're going to wrap up now. Thank you again, everybody, for joining. And we'll post a recording of all of this soon so you can revisit all of these excellent topics. All right. Bye.